Okay, that should be everything in order. Uh, Keith, as far as you can tell, is everything in order?
Yes,
Okay, good.
it is.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to our NGRAIN webinar. This is the second webinar in the 2016 series. It's titled Creating 3D Training Solutions with NGRAIN Producer Pro and Autodesk Fusion 360. And Autodesk Fusion 360 is especially what makes this special. Today I am Alexei Najman-Plotnitsky, Product Manager at Endgrain, and with me is Keith Pollock, Senior Director of Product Sales. Keith, I welcome you to say hello.
Hello, everybody. I see some familiar names on the attendee list, and for those of you I haven't met, welcome, and hopefully we'll meet soon. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, and I want to thank everyone for your interest and for attending today, or in the possibility that you're watching a recording. Thank you for watching. In fact, on a housekeeping note there, we are recording this session, and we will be making it available later. And also, I invite you to ask questions. We won't do a kind of a live Q&A as we roll along, but we certainly pause at the end. And if you type your questions into the chat, then we'll pick some of them to answer as part of this webinar, and some of them, if they're a little more special, we might actually take up personally with you afterwards. In terms of today's agenda, we're going to start with a bit of an introduction on overview so that you know sort of who Endgrain is and what we do. We won't spend very long doing that. Then we'll move on to what you can start with. That is where you begin on this journey with CAD data and Fusion 360, where you can go. So essentially, we're going to show you the kind of maintenance training that you can create with Endgrain software. And then we'll show you how you can get there. So we'll give you a sense of what it's like to use the product and to get to that end state. And then finally, we'll have some Q&A. So then just a quick introduction and overview. So we are Endgrain. This is a screenshot of our website. We are an industrial 3D company. We are famous for voxels, we are famous for augmented reality, and we are famous for virtual maintenance training. And that's what we're here to talk about today. It's interesting, the little questions pop up. We'll look at that later. So the product that we're talking today about is Producer Pro. It is in its version 5.2. Producer Pro is the fastest, easiest way to make 3D virtual maintenance training and virtual task trainers. You can train maintainers in the removal and replacement for the installation, repair, and maintenance of equipment. You don't need a background in 3D graphics, scripting, or programming. You can easily create animations, which we'll see today. You can create SCORM-compliant procedures and tasks, so you can integrate with a learning management system if you like. You can develop it once and deploy it everywhere. We have one authoring platform, and you can create content that's consumed in a number of places. We do not have deployment licensing. That is, we do not have a charge per student model. And finally, you can bring your existing 3D content from any major format, which is, of course, interesting given that we're talking about Autodesk Fusion 360 here. A little bit more about that story. So Endgrain has a format that you need to get to there at the bottom, the Endgrain format, which is what we use in Producer Pro. You can begin in any major format like 3ds Max, Maya, Inventor, CATIA, Creo, SolidWorks, and in fact, and more. And then you need to go through a conversion process to get to Producer. We have sort of three options here. We have the Autodesk Fusion 360 option, which is the highlight of today's webinar, but we also have Polytrans and Transmagic. The Autodesk Fusion 360 is our newest option, and we're going to be talking about that today. Also, just to introduce the sort of develop and deploy paradigm. So Producer Pro is a Windows application where you will be creating your training, but that can go out to places like, for example, what we'll be seeing today, the Windows Desktop Viewer, which is a standalone application. You can also embed your training into Internet Explorer as part of a virtual task trainer. You can put this in also in Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint. We have an Android viewer that I would love to have you ask me questions about, and there are more, many more. Okay, so now we're going to go to what you can start with. So I'll just pop up Fusion 360 here, which I already have open. So what we see on the screen here is a hydraulic floor jack. So this is a CAD model of the kind of floor jack that you might wheel underneath your car, kind of pump the handle up and down, and it sort of lifts the car more powerfully than you could yourself. I think we're all probably at least a little bit familiar with this kind of thing. I got this model at GrabCAD. GrabCAD has a library. It's kind of a useful online resource of 3D CAD files. I didn't look too long or too far. I didn't have very special requirements, but I wanted something that was not too simple, not too complex, reasonably familiar for the audience of a webinar to wrap their head around. What we're looking at here is the step file that was downloaded there, uploaded to Autodesk Fusion 360, and then no further changes made. And so just so you know, the upload and processing to Fusion 360 took maybe a minute or two. It was like quite painless, but I've already done it here. And so we'll just take a look at it. Before I start mousing around, though, I just pause to make a point about frame rates. So because we're streaming this webinar over the web right now, so I'm not exactly sure what frame rates the audience is going to get. What I know is that will, of course, depend on each person in the audience's connection and so on. Just take it from me that this stuff is running buttery smooth at full frame rates on my own machine and could on yours. So I'm just gonna rotate around this BREP model so we can take a look at it. So that we can look at its underside. You can see kind of what this floor jack is made of. Okay, so that's the kind of place that we can start. So what? Where do we end up? And I'll just point out that I'm deliberately telling you this story not in chronological order because I'd rather pique your interest with the kind of training that you can create and then explain how to get there than to sort of slowly build to the conclusion. So we'll just open that up here. So I'm going to open our final training content. So this here, so I've switched over now to the Endgrain Viewer. This is that standalone application where you can open and consume Endgrain training. Here you can see that same floor jack, only take it from me, that's actually the Endgrain format that you're looking at now. And so here I have an animation. So for the purposes of this webinar, we have a hypothetical task, which will be a shipping disassembly of this floor jack, where we will be partially disassembling it for shipping. It's not necessarily a totally valid task. I'm not sure what that disassembly would look like in real life, but actually this webinar is not about floor jacks, it's about software, so I think we can just accept that. Here I have an animation that I've created. It provides a deliberately quick overview to a student of how to perform this task in summary, and I've made it a little fast maybe so that we don't drag out the webinar. So I'm just going to hit play. Again, remember, I'm not sure what your frame rates everyone's going to get. So we have this introduction with a call out that tells us what we're doing. We move on to step one, where we can see we'll be working on the wheels. You see we remove bolts and washers in order to pull the wheel off. And swing around to the other side, where there's also a bolt and a washer. In part two, we remove the rear wheels, which involves the removal of a bolt, a washer, wheel, some other component. Same on the other side. Pull out the axle. Remove the handle. Need to remove these pins. Need to pull out the locking pieces that those pins held in place. Handle slides out. And then finally this carrier handle on the top kind of sticks out a little bit, so we're going to remove that. Moving 2 bolts at one time, why not? For brevity, 2 washers, slide out the axle part piece, and slide the handle off. You can see we're done. Okay, so that was the quick overview animation. I learned something from that if I am the student. But if we want to improve retention, memory retention that is, so that when I'm out in the field actually trying to do these tasks rather than just learning it in the classroom, we can actually have the student practice the task. And so that's what we'll do here. This is if I open up task 1, we can see again we're doing this step 1, front wheel removal. But actually now I and the student have to do this. So we've actually taken an animation and made it interactive. And so you can see my instruction here is to remove bolt 4. Because I've just watched the animation, I know what that means. So I can actually take this bolt, spin it up, and put it in the parts bin. Now my next step is I'm supposed to remove washer 4. So I can slide that up and put it in the parts bin. I can actually pull the wheel off, put that there, and then we'll slide around the other side in order to do the other wheel. And so I'll just take a moment to point out the parts bin. So producer and the viewers were created in consultation with instructional systems designers. That's where all this was born. And what's nice about the parts bin here is that's a metaphor for real life. In a MRO workshop, you're likely to have a parts bin, which is where you put the parts as you take them off. And so everything we can do to make this sort of simulation more real will help our students be immersed and help them learn. So I'll just have some more work to do here. So I can pull a bolt off and a washer and a wheel. On the rear wheel removal, bolt, washer, wheel, other thing, bolt, washer, wheel, other thing, axle. Slide these pins out. More fun for me than it is for you. Don't worry, folks, we're just about done here. So, get the carrier. I'm gonna pull out a bolt somehow. A washer. Bolt. Washer. Bolt. Job's done. Congratulations, we successfully completed the task. And actually, I'll take a moment here just to make a point about features. So Producer Pro is in its version 5.2, and so it's actually reasonably mature. And so that means it has a collection of advanced features, nice to haves, niche features that expert users or even intermediate users would use. And I'm not actually using any of those here today. I'm actually deliberately focusing on the simpler features because I'm trying to illustrate how quickly and easily you could go from having CAD data or CAD data in Fusion 360 already to NGRAIN training. So there are other features here that we're not highlighting and are covered in other training content that could make this experience even better. Okay, so hopefully that's interesting to you. We've shown you where you can begin and where you can get to. And maybe now let's show, like, what does that look like? I mean, Alexi keeps claiming that this is easy. So let's see how easy that is. So we're going to go back to where we began in Autodesk Fusion 360. So here we have that step file that we uploaded, and we're looking at these BREP bodies. So in order to get to the NGRAIN format, we need to go from BREP bodies to meshes, and then meshes to the 3KO, which is the NGRAIN format. We can do that all right here, but we just have to do that step first. So in order to create the meshes, it's real easy. I need to make sure that I'm in the modeling mode. Usually Fusion 360 starts in Sculpt. If I go to Modify here, down to Mesh, and BREP to Mesh, if I click and select everything, and I pop this menu out on the side, we can see we're about to do BREP to Mesh. There's 84 bodies, so there you go. This model has 84 parts, not a tiny number and not a big number. There's a bunch of options here. I told you earlier that you don't need a background in 3D graphics to do this stuff, and take my word for it, you don't. If you just hit OK, it'll be fine. In fact, every time I've ever done this with any model in Fusion 360, if I just hit OK on these values that have been selected for me, everything works out great. So great. Job's easy. Very quickly, we now have a bunch of mesh bodies. I don't know if you can see the subtlety there, but there's this sort of a mesh here now. You can see the lines from the triangles. We could mouse around a little bit and see that it still looks exactly like it did before, only it's made out of mesh now. And you can see that we've got a bunch of mesh bodies. So great. Step one, complete, easy. What's step two? Well, now we need to use the exporter for the NGRAIN format. So if I go up here to the File menu, down to Scripts and Add-ins, and open up the NGRAIN 3KO exporter, we can now save. So I'll save this as like webinar export 1, fine. I'll hit save. Again, let's just go with default values. Life is easy. Okay. Don't need to understand this stuff just yet. So it's going to take a moment, a very quick moment, as you can see, already export complete. Let's take a look at what we created. So I'm just going to go to the Endgrain Viewer now, and we're going to open that file we just saved to my desktop, webinar export 1. We're going to load it up, and oh, look, there's the model. We can certainly recognize it. We can pull it apart, see all its little parts, which is nice. That means we're going to be able to make this nice and interactive. We can hit the attach all button to bring them back into place. But I think you'd all agree that it's a little ugly, actually. That doesn't look very good. What did we do wrong there? Well, I can tell you that it's a thing about resolution. So let's just go back to Fusion 360 and take a look at that dialog we just had. So let's just do a webinar export 2 this time. And so, okay, version 5.1, that's what you want. Hit OK, defaults are good. But this is now where the important part is. So the default size of the export is 400. So what's going on here? Now, I could enthusiastically explain to you all of the cool and unique technology that sits behind NGRAIN stuff and what makes it different. But that, again, would be more interesting to me than it is to you. So we won't do that. Let's suffice to say that NGRAIN's 3D format is like, it could be metaphorically, it's like a photo, and that is that it has a resolution, and the higher that resolution value, the more visually attractive it's going to be, but also the larger the file and the more slowly it's going to be to process. And so like a photo, if your photo was 400 wide, that would actually be a reasonably poor quality photo, and we saw we had it with a reasonably poor quality model when we did that. And if we chose the value of like 2000 instead, we would get a reasonably high quality photo, and you'll see we'll get good results from this as well. So if we take 2000 and then we take this default value on the next thing, this export, it takes a bit longer, actually probably an order of magnitude longer than it did last time, but it's reasonably quick enough that I'm going to let it happen during a webinar, just so that you can see that this is a reasonably quick process to execute. It will drag out just a little bit. As soon as it's done, we'll be able to open it up, and I think you will immediately see the difference. Done. Great. Okay, so let's go to Viewer. Here's the ugly floor jack. We open up the beautiful floor jack. We'll see. There it is in its shiny glory. Much crisper, much cleaner, much more attractive. This is the kind of visual fidelity that we're happy for our students to see. But it's not perfect yet, and I'll actually use this opportunity to highlight a feature of the exporter. So if I zoom in on this grip here, yeah, it looks kind of ugly. And there's a reason for that. So this grip is actually a reasonably complex piece. It's got all those grooves in the rubber. And while this whole model has a resolution of 2000, the actual grip here probably has a resolution of more like 100. And that's just like too much detail for 100. But we do have the opportunity to override that resolution. So if we went into Fusion 360 and we found that part, in this case, well, we'll just switch over here. So if we found that part named grip and we changed its name to _R_2000, that actually instructs the exporter to export that grip at a 2000 resolution. So now the whole model is going to be 2000, but actually individually that grip is going to be 2000 as well. I'm not actually going to run the export live on the webinar because it's going to take pretty much twice as long as the last one did. And I think we've got better things to do than just sit around while that happens. But I will show you what the result looks like. So if I now open that, what that would look like, here we can see it's the same floor jack, but now the grip is kind of much more nice. We can see it's got these grooves from all of the rubber bits. Great. So you could selectively improve all kinds of little pieces on this thing, like if you wanted the pins to look better. This actually cuts both ways. So if, for example, you found that you had parts that you didn't need to be high resolution and you were doing some very advanced work, and so you ended up with large file sizes, you could actually override the resolution down. So rather than setting it to 2000, you could take a part that was 1000 and set it down to 100. So that it has that flexibility there, but we're sort of getting into the realm of the more advanced users. So we won't do more there. Okay, so that looks good. We've got an export we're happy with. It's time to open this up in Producer and do some work on it. So no, we're not going to save the final version there, but we are going to open up basic exported model. So here it is in all its shiny white glory. You see it's got some nice lighting and reflectivity on it, but it is white. What's going on there? Well, truth is that the model didn't have any color information in it. So we don't have any color information now. But that doesn't stop us from making this look good. So if I go into model editing mode, we can actually colorize this model a bit. So if I pick sort of this, I'm control clicking here, kind of pick these parts, I can actually right click and part color, I can set it to blue. Maybe I want these wheels, the grip be set to black. Maybe I want this handle and this plate. Whoops, there we go. Set to yellow. I think you get the idea. So, already now this is starting to look like a real piece of equipment that we can believe. If you were creating something for a webinar, you might go through the model and shade some of these things slightly different grays. And in fact, I have. So let's just jump to that colored model so we can take a look at it. So there we go. That looks nice. Maybe our company produces a blue hydraulic jack. Maybe it's red. We could easily make it red as well. So that's nice. So step one, it's got some color. That's great. What's step two? Okay, so step two, we need to look at the attachment hierarchy. So in NGRAIN, every part of the model is attached to another part of the model, all the way up to sort of one mother part. Maybe you might call it a root part, something. And you can see right now after the export, actually everything is just in this tree here, this attachment tree. Sorry, I should have introduced that. Everything is just attached to the frame, right? So what do you really mean, Alexi? Well, I can just show you. It'll be much easier to just demonstrate the significance here. So if I pop this bolt off and put it there, I can actually select it and go to attach. And that actually sends it back to its attachment point. That seemed fine, nothing's wrong here, except if I pull this bolt off and I pull the threads that it goes on off, if I actually pick this bolt now and I hit attach, it doesn't go back onto the threads like I would expect. It actually goes back into this sort of place in the model. And that's because currently the bolt attachment is this frame right here, this. Now we can fix that. So to show you what the alternative looks like, this is bolt 4 and this is threads right. So if I, in the tree here, if I grab bolt 4 and I drag it down to threads right there, now if I select the bolt and I attach it, it actually attaches to the threads right. We can also do that for this washer here. So this washer here is still currently attached to frame right, just like everything else. But I can drag that up under frames right. And now if I attach the threads right, now if I hit attach, it goes to where it belongs and actually send the whole group back. So this feature is really useful when it comes to, among other things, creating animations, because I can easily group objects and send them where they need to go. And so ultimately, I want to bring out build out this whole tree here. So rather than having everything hanging off a frame right, have all the bolts on the threads and so on, we're actually going to do that. It's 80 parts. It's not going to take very long, but it's going to take long enough that we're not going to do it in a webinar. So I'll just hit open now, and we'll visit the attached file where I've done it. So here, this is sort of tree I'm talking about here, where every part is attached to some other part, eventually up to frame right. That's great. Job's done. Attachment's complete. So now return to knowledge production. So we've been in model editing mode right here. We can now return to knowledge production where we'd be doing our work. And actually, what this catches my eye. So what's this here? This is the parts list. And so we can see very sort of familiar list of parts here, left side, right side, the bolt 4 and the threads right are there just before. But actually, there's this flat structure here again. What's going on in there? So this is the parts list, which is composed of parts and assemblies. It's not the same thing as the attachment hierarchy. Why that is or why that's useful is a little hard to explain, but let's just suffice to say that it is useful, and advanced users appreciate that. We can, and we're going to want to rearrange this because this parts list here is actually what the student sees and experiences. And so we're going to want to create a tree structure here as well. That sounds like repeating a lot of the same work. I mean, if we're going to create assemblies, those assemblies are mostly attached to each other. Why are you going to make me repeat this work? Well, I'm not. Of course, the producer product designers thought about this. And so there's this little button here that says generate parts list based on attachments. If we click that and we say yes on the little dialog, poof, we now have a tree structure. And so you can see like we've got this pretty deep tree of attachments. Something funny is going on here because everything's got a name, assembly 1, assembly 5, 6, whatever. Those are there for us to rename and rearrange, and this is sort of what we'll do now. I'll give you just a quick sense for what that looks like. It's not difficult, but so we're just going to focus on this wheel here, and we're going to see that this wheel part is actually in this like assembly 29, which is in 26, 20, and 27, a bit complicated. If you'll recall, actually, when we did this, when we saw the animation, as far as the students are concerned in this training, the wheel is actually one homogeneous part. So the fact that I can pull this wheel apart and see that it's got an axle and a kind of a swivel part, and actually furthermore, there's even like individual bearings modeled in here. Like the students don't care. So we'd really just have them all locked together. And so that's exactly what we can do. So I'm just going to pop those things back into place. So if I'm just going to switch on context view here, you'll see immediately what that means. So if I now pick parts in this list here, they get highlighted with everything else sort of transparent. And I can actually pick assemblies, so we can see that whole thing. I can pick this whole assembly, assembly 27. And actually see that 27 is actually most of the wheel. The only thing that's really missing here is the threads. So what I would do probably is I would take these bearings and I put them in 27. I take these parts and put them in 27. I now have sort of 2 empty assemblies, which I can delete. I'll take the threads and I'll put them. Now 27 starts to look like the whole wheel. And so what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to lock that assembly. That assembly now, as far as the students are concerned, is essentially just one part. It just functions as one part. Actually, as far as the author is concerned, it functions as one part as well. It's going to make our life easy. I'm going to actually rename it. So I'm going to call it a wheel. And now we have a wheel and a bolt and a washer, which maybe together comprises a wheel assembly. So that's the kind of cleanup we're going to do at this point, where we're thinking about what kind of training we're going to be creating. And of course, that little bit of work gets repeated a few times, and we're not going to dwell on that in the webinar. So I'm just going to jump ahead to what that would look like. So here we go. So now you can see I've got a nice sort of tree of assembled parts and locked assemblies. Just to sort of show you what that looks like at a high level now, just collapse the tree, put in context mode, and you'll see we've got this carrier assembly, this hydraulics part, left side, lift, a plate, the rear wheels on the right side. So great, okay, now we're good to go. So we've created these assemblies. There's one more thing we're going to do to set up this model before we get going. So we're just going to zoom in here again on this bolt. So I don't know if you noticed during the animation playing, but when we grab this bolt, it didn't just kind of float off, you know, when we pulled it off. It didn't just sort of cut through the threads and float in this disembodied way. It actually spun off. And so we can create that effect. And it's quite nice for simulating the real world. So we're going to go into model editing mode. We're going to pick this bolt. And here we are under constraints. We can actually create a bolt constraint. So this is a bolt. There's going to be a bolt constraint. No big surprise there. So if I pick this, then it's like, okay, we got this bolt. The constrained part is bolt 4. Now I have to select the static part. So bolt 4 is constrained to go on the threads. Next, there's a little default name, which is always nice. This is where we have to pick the axis of the constraint. So this is wrong. We don't want this purple line. We want the purple line to go like that because the bolt slides up and down. Great. Next, the bolt slides from its current position to about there. Capture the second boundary, at which point it can move freely. It pops off and flies away. So great. Next, we're going to say maybe it does about 6 rotations. It's a right-handed thread, like kind of most bolts, but not all bolts. And we can hit finish. And so now if I grab this thing, it spins. Oh, I think I didn't set it to move freely. You can see when I pull it off, it actually gets jammed up here. So let's just go back into that and we'll edit the constraint. We're happy with that it's constrained to threads right. We're happy with the name. We're happy with the y-axis. But at the second boundary, it can move freely. Great. Finish. Okay, so now it pops off and spins away. So that you can see that if it couldn't move freely, that might be useful in other applications. So for example, I suppose in an abacus, the balls can move back and forth, but they don't pop off and move freely. They are constrained always to be on the line. So that's a bolt constraint, which allows us to sort of spin the nut up and down and create a nice immersive simulation for our students. That's not the only type of constraint we might create. So here we also have a washer. Washers don't spin, they just slide. And so we can actually capture that as well. So in this case, this would be a linear movement constraint. This is very similar. So it's going to be constrained to this static part, which is the threads. It's going to have a name, which is fine. It's going to go on the y-axis again. This is a little different. So we have a first boundary and a second boundary on linear movement constraints. So in this case, this is the first boundary, and the washer can't move at this point. But then the washer slides up to about here, at which point it's free to move. So I just captured the second boundary, and I say move freely. And now this washer slides up and down, but if I pull it off, eventually it goes free. And so I can also I'll pop it back on and put the bolt back on. Sorry, I got that wrong. Okay, not sure. Something's gone wrong there, but we can certainly attach it. Right, so there's a lot of constraints we might create in this model. I mean, you can see we've got a bolt here, which is disembodied, we've got a bolt here, and so on. But you can see, like, creating this is really fast. And so we would do a lot of that, and we just jump ahead on the webinar rather than watch all of that get created. So here we are. We've got a bunch of constraints. Just going to make sure they're all enabled here. So now we've got bolts that spin off here and bolts that spin off here, as you might expect. You can also have these little keys here slide out with a linear constraint. That's quite nice. And actually, there's one other type of constraint here I'll just show off here is a hinge. So this handle kind of hinges about its axis, which is nice and realistic. Okay, so that's constraints. Now we're ready to really do some honest to goodness knowledge production. So let's just open this file up here. So let's just see what creating animations is like. So this is a file where I've kind of started creating an animation. So if we switch back into knowledge production mode, there's a button for that here. Here we've got a little animation that I've started called animation 1. If I open it up, now we get this little timeline across the bottom. So Endgrain animations are defined by a series of keyframes. And so essentially, you, the author, set what the state of the world looks like in each keyframe, and then the animation player does the rest. And so to illustrate what that looks like, if I open this keyframe at the 7-second mark, we can see we're just looking at this sort of 3/4 view of the jack. At 8 seconds, we're zoomed in on the wheel. And so if I pick the 7-second and I hit play, then over the course of a second, the camera moves in to be looking at the wheel. So that's just 2 keyframes, and the rest is done for me. So now, okay, fine. We've got 5 keyframes here on the storyboard right now. If I open the first one, you can see we've got a little call out here that's, introduces what we're about to do. And then 3 seconds later, there's a different call out, and we've got this, the wheels highlighted because that's what the next step is. 3 seconds later, the call out and the highlighting is gone. 1 second later, nothing has changed. And then we zoom in. So if we just go back to the start and hit play, we'll see 3 seconds of introduction, 3 seconds of step 1. It all goes away. We wait a second, and then we zoom in for a second. Great, easy. So that's the work I already did to set this up. But we can extend this, and so let's just do that together now. So you'll remember that the first thing that happens is the bolt comes off. So let's do that. So, oops. This is the thing about the constraints, is we need to make sure they're enabled. So I'm just going to go to the list here, select them all, and enable them. So now if I grab the bolt, it spins. That's nice. So let's just spin it up. And so the bolts come off, and so we're just going to right-click on the timeline and add a keyframe. So now if we've picked the 8-minute mark and we hit play, then it spins off over the course of a second. And so now if I right-click on it and I hide it, and I add another keyframe, now it's going to spin off and disappear like that. Great. So then similarly, we can pull the washer up. We can add a keyframe. We can hide the washer, add a keyframe. We can slide the wheel out, add a keyframe. And we can hide the wheel and add a keyframe. And so now we look at what we created. Bolt comes out, disappears. Washer comes up, disappears. And wheel comes out and disappears. Great. And so the next step in this would be to rotate around the other side of the model. So we spin around, we add a keyframe, we give ourselves maybe 2 seconds. And then, of course, out here, bolt comes off, and so on. And so you can see, like, pretty rapidly, we're creating this animation here. I'll just show you what that looked like now. Wheel comes off, disappears, we spin around the model. So bang, 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 we're just creating these frames to rapidly and easily create this animation without being 3D experts. So let's just see what this looks like when it's completed. So we'll open up the final here. And down here in the animation, loads for a moment, and there we go. So these are all just the keyframes across the bottom. There's the introduction that we're all familiar with. There's the bolts and washers and wheels coming off. And you can see it's just more of the same. Transition to the rear wheels, the bits come off, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So it's all just quite familiar at this point, I think. So then what we won't go into now is what it looks like to create a task. It's pretty easy. It's a lot like what we just did, only a little bit different. And you can find other videos on YouTube now or documents on how to do that. I'll just show you a little bit of what the task looks like. So if I open it up, there's a little bit of loading. And you can see, kind of just like the animation, there's a storyboard across the bottom instead of a timeline. There are these frames within which things happen. Bits come off, and so on, and eventually we're done. So that concludes my telling you a little bit about how you too could create what we saw earlier. I'm going to just jump back to the slides here so you can see this. We're about to hit the Q&A portion of the presentation. I will point out that you can get demos of everything you see here. So Producer Pro is available as a demo at NGRAIN.com. You can click through from there. There are also Fusion 360 demos available. If you go to this link, although obviously probably Fusion 360 into Google or your search engine of choice is probably just a fine way of finding that. The exporter is not quite, that is the script that we use to create the Endgrain format. It's not quite available in the Fusion 360 sort of library store, but it will be very soon. If you want access to it, feel free to just write us, and we'll set you up sort of on a one-on-one basis. Our email addresses, Keith and I, are there at the top of the screen. So feel free to talk to us about anything, actually. We're quite open like that. And then now I pause for questions. Keith, have you been paying attention to the questions? I think you probably have.
Yeah, actually I have, and I've been trying to answer some of them as we go through. But Lexi have been asked regarding file formats supported, as well as file sizes. And I thought it might make sense if you just pop up really quickly the Endgrain file that you were using today, that you actually had all the content in, just to let them see the size of the file we were working with here. And what I would add to this is Endgrain, through third-party relationships with companies like Autodesk, support many formats. So we can cover just about anything that's out there. So any of the CAD formats, any of the digital content creation products, such as Autodesk Maya or 3D Max. And we can also convert scan data as well. So if anybody has some scan data out there and they're trying to get it into a format and package like this. You can see here, I guess the file size was 4, what is that, megabytes? So you can see we're extremely compressed. And there was a question that came across regarding polygonal counts and file sizes and such. So I wanted to bring this up just real quickly, just to let everybody know again, NGRAIN is not a polygonal software package. Alexi mentioned this in the beginning of the webinar. We are a volumetric or voxel-based package. And what this does is this really gives you a couple things. One is NGRAIN holds patents in our data compression. So you'll see the file compression is extremely compressed without losing any of the things such as data quality, or in the situation if you're actually converting over models that have textures on them, you can bring those textures across and still get extreme data compression. The other real advantage to this is that once you convert to NGRAIN, you're really protecting your intellectual property. So your CAD models are not being placed in a polygonal format into a document or into an application that could eventually be hacked. And those CAD files could be re-engineered or reverse engineered to get them back into a CAD system. That is physically and literally impossible to do with the NGRAIN product. So once you convert over to NGRAIN, you're in the NGRAIN format moving forward, and there's no way to hack, modify, or take these things back to a CAD system. So our clients, especially in defense and aerospace, really like that feature because CAD content. Okay, and a couple other questions have come in here. One was regarding evaluations. So how does one go about doing that? It's fairly easy. So NGRAIN does provide evaluations of our Producer Pro package. That can be downloaded from our website. There's a form there if you'd like to evaluate. And that's a full functioning 30-day evaluation of NGRAIN Producer Pro. And then, of course, if you go out to Autodesk, there's information on the Fusion 360 product as well. And then we also provide a couple translators from a couple other companies as well, and they have their own evaluation programs. So if you're interested in evaluating NGRAIN, you can test it out. You can actually use your own content and get it into NGRAIN and move on from there. Regarding licensing models and pricing, some of these questions are coming in as I'm speaking here. So pricing is we've got a perpetual license pricing. If somebody wants to actually just buy the product, you can do that. We've also got yearly and a 6-month subscription pricing as well. In addition, on the licensing side of it, once you purchase a product of NGRAIN, it is very similar to a lot of authoring tools. There is no downstream additional licensing, pricing, deployment pricing, anything. Once you purchase as much content and deploy as much content as often as you would like to your customers, whether that be for free or for revenue for your company. We provide software tools. We have no downstream licensing or what's typically known in the industry as tails or revenue models. So you purchase the product, it's yours, create content, deploy content, all of that. Additional questions here. Alexi, have you seen a couple come across on your side? So one that was asked fairly early, the format that your floor jack was in that you were working on within NGRAIN. So originally, I think you said the file was step, Alexa?
Yeah, so the actual download came with a few different file formats. The step was one that had the parts broken out nicely. I'm not actually sure what it didn't have polys in it to begin with, right? But if you're asking what the poly count was after conversion, it's funny because, of course, in NGRAIN's world, the poly count doesn't really matter. We end up with nice small files no matter what. So I'm not actually familiar enough with the Fusion product to be able to answer that question.
Yeah, so the original file was step. It was converted into Fusion 360. 360, we output it to an NGRAIN format. And the NGRAIN file that Alexa was working on with all of the tasks, animations, all that content that had been put in through Producer Pro was 4 megabytes. So extremely compressed.
And I'll point out too, just a slightly nerdy comment here, that actually the compression is non-linear too. So when your poly count goes up, actually for the most part your NGRAIN size doesn't. It would a little bit, but certainly not on a one-to-one. So if you had a 50 megabyte CAD file and that generated a 5 megabyte NGRAIN file, 100 CAD would probably not generate 10 NGRAIN. It might be 6 actually. And so I've seen gigabyte files become 15 megabyte NGRAIN files. So let's just give you a sense of the compression we're talking about.
So a question was asked regarding importing XML data into Producer Pro. So NGRAIN files, if you look at an NGRAIN 3KO file and you actually unzip that file, what you'll find is you'll find an XML-based file, and then you'll also find a NGRAIN graphic file inside that 3KO file, that 4 meg 3KO file in the case of this floor jack. Some of our customers have actually built their own parsers that allow them to go in and modify content within that XML file. We do not actually provide a tool that allows you to import XML data into Producer Pro, but we do allow our customers, if they have the requirements, to go in and actually modify the XML files once they're inside that NGRAIN 3K. I answered the question, but Alexi and I are completely available after the webinar and definitely via email. If anybody has any very technical questions that they'd like further to delve into, we are more than willing to help you out with those and actually enjoy the conversation talking about it as well. So we look forward to questions after the webinar. I think that's it for questions.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I think it's just basically time for us to conclude. So we'll do that. I want to thank everyone for their time and for their interest and for coming today. This recording will be available shortly. And have a good one, and I'll invite Keith to sign off as well.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.